topic given to me is good clinical practice. So I'll be completing the first part of it. That is overview and ethical considerations in clinical trials, and then my colleague Dr. Anuradha will take over. So this presentation cannot be complete without paying our gratitude to the doctor who first, carried on with controlled clinical experiment in the year 1747. Dr. James Lind, he was quite disturbed by the fact that the sailors suffered from scurvy. So he had given them lemon and oranges. So one group received one lime and two oranges daily. He did not give it to all the sailors, but he had given it to only few who were on board in the ship. So that is the first example of a control. We say control because he had groups. He didn't give the same treatment to all the participants. So this was a controlled first clinical experimentation on human that is documented. So it was conducted in the year 1747. In this presentation, I will discuss about the introduction to GCP, the historical perspective on GCP, then the broad principles of GCP, roles and responsibilities of ethics committee, and finally, I think I will finish my discussion with few case discussions. So GCP or good clinical practice, it is the standard for clinical trials or studies. So it gives us pointer towards the design, conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analysis, and reporting of a clinical trial or a clinical study. It provides an assurance on the rights, safety, and well-being of human participants. Since this corona pandemic is going on, and we are addressing this Indira Gandhi Institute of Child Health today, so I thought this picture is quite relevant. It's a decade-old picture. It's a decade-old Soviet study that had hinted at coronavirus strategy. A married pair of virologists in Moscow, they tested a vaccine on their own children way back in the year 1950. And their children have grown up to become virologists now. And in this pandemic, they have given their interviews to various media, stating that their mom every month she would give them sugar-coated live sugar-coated live polio virus to prevent them from seasonal flu. So they used to receive this sugary coated, live virus every year, and that had prevented them from getting the flu. So the same strategy, that is, where people are trying whether the same strategy can be used and repurposed of the vaccines for the prevention of coronavirus. So we will take this case as an example today as I move on to my next slide. So I want all the participants to think about this problem, right? So what happened is one researcher found that this polio vaccine can be helpful in heart children. So that day, those time, it was very difficult for them to go ahead and do some control experimentation. Permission would not be granted. So what they did is the couple, they tried the therapy or strategy on their own children. So the strategy was live polio vaccine in own children to prevent them from getting seasonal flu. So the children used to receive it every year. So the background, of GCP is that GCP began at the end of World War II, and it was developed by the World Medical Association. It was released in the year, the guidelines were released in 1964 in the 18th meeting of World Medical Association. So this GCP is considered a fundamental document in the ethics of human research. So what are the goals of GCP? So the main goals are to protect the rights, safety, and welfare of the research participants. At the same time, to ensure the quality, the reliability and the integrity of the data collected, and also to provide standards and guidelines for the conduct of clinical research. So very important for us to remember that it is nothing but the GCP document helps us to protect the right, safety and welfare of the research participants. At the same time, it helps in the generation of data that is good in quality, that is reliable and that has integrity. So GCP, in one word, it is ethics plus quality data. We have, various examples from the past that led to the evolution of GCP. By evolution, I mean the various, the various rules and regulations that came in force. The first regulation is this Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act that came in the year 1938, followed by the Nuremberg Code 1947, and this code was after the Nazi trials, and then Declaration of Helsinki around 1964, Belmont Report 1979, and nowadays whatever we follow is International Conference on Harmonization Guidelines, that is ICH GCP guidelines, and that is for the globe. But in India, we have Indian specific guidelines that I'll be discussing in my the later slides. So, a lot of bad things had happened in the past, but I don't think it was human fault also, because for anything to happen, right, for any good thing, we need a, beginning. And these incidents are the beginning to the principles and guidelines that we have today. So there are reports. So this is a, newspaper clip from a Chicago newspaper, and that mentioned that the laboratory experiments made it quite evident that ethylene glycol, not the sulfanilamide of an elixir of sulfalinamide, was responsible for the death of 13 persons. So it's not 13; it led to the death of more than 100 U.S. Citizens, many of whom were children. So this elixir sulfanilamide, it had the taste of raspberries. So it was given for the treatment of these streptococcal infections. It was difficult to dissolve sulfanilamide, so it was mixed with the solvent diethylene glycol. It's a known toxin actually, but this diethylene glycol led to the death of so many individuals. The company tested the elixir only for its appearance and palatability before its nationwide distribution. So what had the idea, and they came up with drug discovery, they developed the drug, and finally they marketed the drugs without proper experimentation. There was no concept of, mind it, we are talking about the year 1937, so if you look at studies and then controlled clinical trials before a drug is marketed. So this catastrophic event, it prompted the passage of 1938 Federal Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act. So the other code is the Nuremberg Code. So that, arise because of the Nazi atrocities in World War II. It drew attention to lack of international standards on research with human and especially the war prisoners. So it violated the human rights, and 23 German physicians, nurses and administrators were tried, in a trial. They had the criminal proceedings, but unfortunately, it did not lead to their punishment or anything. They just escaped. So these Nazi doctors were very fond of, twin babies or of pediatric age group, because they could do so many types of experimentation. So they wanted to be the superior race. So they were very much interested in twins. They would, just draw out the eyes from the eyeball. They would make these kids drink a lot of water so that the rectum comes out, and they used to collect samples. So there were a lot of inhuman experimentation. Various types of experimentation, like freezing experiment, they would expose the shoulders to freezing temperature, and they would note the temperature that would lead to death of the prisoner. So this is to see, because their soldiers were fighting, so just to mimic the conditions for them and to see what temperature would lead to the death of the prisoner. Or in other words, like their own people, their own soldiers. So freezing experiments, genetic experiments, infectious disease experiments, they would expose these prisoners to mosquitoes and other infectious agents and would carry on with experimentation. Salt water, sea water experiments, sterilization experiment, poison and traumatic injuries, like so many inhuman studies they have conducted. So because of all those inhuman studies, we got the Nuremberg Code. It's nothing but, it talks about the voluntary participation and the need for informed consent. So in other words, the benefit of research must outweigh the risk involved, right? So after the Nuremberg Code, we got two important, direction. One is like participation in any clinical research, voluntary clinical trial. And number two, there should be a, and number two, there should be voluntary. And number three, that was going on the like he started Kingman, he started abusing the prisoners. He started experimenting on them involving toothpaste, deodorant, shampoos, skin creams, detergents. So what I saw within, and he compared it with himself as a farmer seeing a field for the first time. Just imagine, this human skin was compared with a farmland. So though the tests required constant biopsies and painful procedures, skin was compared with a farmland. So those tests required for the first time. Just imagine, this human skin was compared. And that another example is that others to thalidomide, and it was marketed for the treatment of morning sickness. And they're born with severely deformed arms and legs. An estimated 10,000 cases of infant deformities in Europe were linked to thalidomide. Deformities in Europe were linked to use. So all human studies or trials, they led to the declaration of Helsinki by one medical journalism in human studies. Syphilis study. So this study was conducted by U.S. Public Health Department in Tuskegee, Alabama, in 600 low-income African American males. 600 low-income African American males. The study was conducted in 400 subjects infected with syphilis. So 400 subjects were infected with syphilis. It was conducted without due care to the subjects. The subjects were not asked to give consent. They were assured of free treatment, free ride to the clinic, free meal, and free burial insurances. In the middle of the study, these participants received a letter stating that this is the last chance for free special treatment. And what was this free special treatment? It was a lumbar puncture. The subjects were monitored for 40 years. The study continued from 1932 to 1972 without providing access to penicillin. We all know that around 1942, penicillin was there in the market. Even though penicillin was available, the participants were not given access to penicillin. They were not told that, a definitive cure for syphilis was there in the market. But the study they conducted to determine if the patients were or better off not being treated with the toxic available remedies, right? So many of the subjects died of syphilis during the study. The study stopped in 1973, only after its existence was publicized, and it became a political embarrassment for the US government. So after such instances, there was the Belmont report in 1979. That was the first time, the concept of ethics institutional review board or ethics committee or national human investigation board were coined. So now we are, this whole GCP thing, right? It is guided by or regulated by the International Conference of Harmonization, ICH, right? In 1996, International Conference on Harmonization published this GCP guidelines, which has become the universal standard for ethical conduct of clinical trials. So this was required because we needed to have something that is common for the globe. There are 13 principles of ICH GCP, and I'll be telling you all the 13 principles. So principles related to ethics. Number one, any trial, it should be conducted based on ethical conduct of clinical trials. Number two, the benefits should justify the risk of the study. Number three, right, safety and well-being of subjects should prevail over anything else. Then we have, principles related to the protocol and science. So number 4 principle of ICH GCP is non-clinical and clinical information should be present. So I think if you all have seen a investigator's brochure, right, we have non-clinical or even a clinical trial protocol. We have both non-clinical and clinical information. And a protocol should be scientifically sound and it should be a detailed one. IRB IEC approval is a must prior to initiation of the study. ICH GCP number 7 guideline or principle, it mentions about medical care and decisions. This decision should be taken by a qualified physician. It's qualified physician. So it's just not a physician, if a study requires intervention or, any device. So the physician and the team, the whole team should be trained on that. Each individual should be qualified as per his or her education, training and experience. Number 9 principle of ICH GCP, it talks about informed consent. Informed consent should be given freely from every subject prior to participation. Number 10, then we have section on data quality and integrity. We should accurately report the data. Data should be interpreted, should be in such a way that it should be interpreted easily and it should be verified. And it must protect the confidentiality of participants. So all the records, every clinical trial document is a confidentiality document and we have to maintain the confidentiality. Then comes the investigational products, right? So they should conform to good manufacturing practice and should be used as per the protocol. The last principle, it's about, quality control or quality assurance. It says systems with procedures. There should be systems with procedures to ensure quality of every aspect of a trial. So these are the 13 principles of ICH GCP. I think I should discuss the principle. I should list them once more. So first is ethical conduct of clinical trial. Then benefits should justify the risk. It should protect the right, safety and well-being of the subjects. Number 4, there should be non-clinical and clinical information available. It should be scientifically sound and detailed one. I mean the protocol. Then IRB IEC approval should be there prior to initiation of the study. All the medical care decisions should be taken by the qualified physician. Each individual of the study team should be qualified. Informed consent should be free and it should be given by every subject prior to participation in the study. And then data and quality, data should be, accurate. It should be easily interpretable and it should be verified. And data, we should be protected, right? That protects confidentiality of record. If you see the clinical trial documents, usually the name of the subject is not written. They are given some code. Now, for the investigational product, it should conform to good manufacturing practice guidelines. And the last principle is on quality control. There should be systems in place to ensure quality of every aspect of the trial. So till now we have discussed about the evolution of GCP and why GCP is important. So I have talked about, I think I have talked about the first the control clinical study that was by Dr. Lind, and it was on sailors because they used to suffer from scurvy, and he had given orange and lime and compared it to the other groups who used to receive, like soups, then seawater, and there were various other interventions. So that was the first control study. And then like the requirement for GCP, so it has evolved because of the inhuman studies in the past, the inhuman Nazi trials, then the mishap that occurred because of the thalidomide that occurred because of the antibiotic of the sulfur class. And there are many such examples. I have just given you few examples to understand why this GCP is important. And also, like, if we want to conduct a study on repurposing of vaccine, right, for the treatment of coronavirus, how important it is to go through the proper protocol. Now, about clinical trials in India, it is regulated by the CDSCO. We have Schedule Y that gives us the guideline, and Schedule Y is also a law. Now, ICMR gives the guideline on National Ethical Guideline for the biomedical and health research involving human participants. The full documents are available from ICMR website. So, all trials or all clinical studies need to be mandatorily registered in the Clinical Trial Registry of India, CTRI. You all have postgraduate students. It's mandatory. It's good. It's a good practice for their publication also, because the reviewers will ask what was the CTRI number. So it's always good to go ahead and do the registration. It's a small process. So who are the stakeholders of GCP? So the first stakeholder is the sponsor, because he has the drug. Then clinical investigators who have to prescribe the drug. Then ethics committee to monitor the overall conduct of the trial. Then CRO. Then research nurses and clinical research coordinators who assist the principal investigator. Then medical monitors, they are usually employed from the pharma industry, because they also do not want anything to go wrong in the process, because after all they have to spend many years on research and for the development of the drug. And finally, data entry personnel and others. So it's an integrated approach. Everyone else involved in the clinical trial or clinical research needs to be trained in GCP, and so these people are the stakeholders of GCP. Now I'll be discussing about the ethical considerations of the clinical trials. So here I will discuss about, okay, so till now in the overview, if you have any questions, you can ask me. I think we can unmute you. Maybe you can raise your hands if you have any issues till now. Anything that you did not understand? Or else I'll go ahead with my presentation. I think we can have question answers during the QA session. I'll be discussing about the Institutional Ethics Committee, about the members, the roles and responsibilities of the members, then little bit about informed consent, confidentiality, then who are the vulnerable population. I have given example of the prisoners, the war, the soldiers. So all these are the pediatric population. So all these are vulnerable population. Then I will conclude my presentation with few case discussions. So what do we see in this picture? The first thing that I see is, people are discussing. So maybe it's a boardroom. And if you count, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there are 7 participants, right? There are 7 participants. And I see that, it's a combination of males and females. And, maybe they're of different age. So 7 participants of different age and sex. The recommended number for any ethics committee is 7 to 15. EC is a mix of medical, non-medical, scientific and non-scientific persons and lay public. In any EC, there should be adequate representation of age and gender. So preferably 50% of the members should be non-affiliated or should be from outside the institute. So this is a new law that came in recently last year, right? 50% of the members should be non-affiliated or they should be from outside the institution. And about quorum means, the minimum number of persons required to host a meeting. So minimum number of persons is 7. Regarding the members of IEC, Institutional Ethics Committee, as I mentioned, 50% should be from outside the institution. So here, let me tell you about the non-affiliated members. So number 1, chairperson and vice chairperson. Vice chairperson is optional. A committee can have only one chairperson or can have both chairperson and vice chairperson. Committees who meet once every month. So it is good to have both chairperson and vice chairperson. In case the chairperson is absent, the vice chairperson can take the role of the chairperson. So it helps to have the frequency of the meeting. So number 2, lay person. So these two are supposed to be non-affiliated, right? The chairperson, vice chairperson, and the lay persons. Number 2, affiliated or non-affiliated. They can be either from the institute or from outside the institute. So 3 is basic medical scientist and preferably a pharmacologist, because here we deal with drugs. So they are the person, who can study the pharmacokinetic, dynamic, the ADR aspects of the drugs. Number 4, clinician. 5, legal expert. 6, social scientist, philosopher, ethicist, or theologian. So, in many committees, usually the chairperson is a legal expert also. So that way you can have 6 members, but you can still have the quorum. The affiliated member that must be affiliated is the member secretary. So member secretary is always from the institution. Chairperson or vice chairperson is always from outside the institution. So quorum is 7, and these are the people who make the quorum: chairperson, lay person, basic medical scientist, clinician, then legal expert, social scientist. So you don't have to have social scientist, then philosopher, ethicist. You can have one of them in the committee. And finally, the affiliated member is the member secretary.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, meeting might end in 2 minutes. So if it ends, if it abruptly ends, we'll re-log in.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the basic responsibilities of IRB is to protect the dignity, rights, safety, and well-being of the participants, and to oversee that universal ethical values and international standards. I told you about ICH GCP. This is to standardize studies throughout the globe. So responsibility is to oversee that the universal ethical values and international scientific standards are followed in terms of local community values and customs. So I'll give you an example. Like if you are doing a trial with insulin and you want to get, people from a particular sect, you have to keep thinking about Ramzan. So during Ramzan month, these people may fast. So, you cannot have a proper insulin study. There will be always a room for bias. So that's why it is mentioned that international universal ethical values and standards followed in terms of local community values and customs. The other thing is privacy, confidentiality of data must be, ethics committee, they have to look into these documents, and they have to look into the compensation aspect of the study. And the other important, aspect that many times these ECs do not take up is the site monitoring at least once a month, right? ECs can, visit the site and, they can take a look at all the clinical trial documents, the informed consent form, the case report form, and they must go through and, they must ensure that these adhere to the standard guideline. So there are three main responsibilities of the EC in terms of autonomy, beneficence, and justice. Now let me discuss about the roles of the chairperson. So as I mentioned, chairperson is from outside the institute. So he is an independent member, and he should, ensure independent and efficient functioning of the EC. He should ensure active participation of all the members. So in the beginning of this, meeting, actually he has to take the roll call, right? Whether the quorum is there, whether all members are present or not. So he ratifies the minutes of the previous meeting. He ensures quorum and fair decision making. So he is the person who handles complaints against researchers, EC members, and the request for use of EC data. He is the person who handles all the conflict of interest issues. This is about chairperson. Now let us discuss about member secretary. As I mentioned, member secretary is always from within the institute. So the roles and responsibilities of member secretary is, procedure for preparing, receiving, circulating, and maintaining proposals. So usually he has a secretary because he himself cannot manage. So through the secretary, he ensures that all these responsibilities are taken care of. He schedules meetings and records the discussions. He prepares the agenda and minutes and ensures that training of the ethics committee members. He ensures updation of SOP. Like recently, we had new amendments to Schedule Y. As soon as we had the amendment, so it was the responsibility of our member secretary to initiate this updation process of the SOPs. Then adherence of EC functioning to the SOPs. So all the EC members need to be trained in those SOPs. He is the person who prepares for or responds to audits and inspections. For example, many of the ECs are accredited by NABH. So in case of NABH audit, NABH inspection, so he is the person who responds to all those queries. He is the one who assesses the need for expedited review or exemption from full review or full review. I will discuss about this in my other slide. Now, the basic medical scientist, so the main role is to oversee the scientific and ethical review with special emphasis on the intervention. As I mentioned, the pharmacologist is there, and I am heading the ethics committee. Like I am making sure to look into the animal study data, to read up the pharmacokinetic data, and then to make sure that all the areas that are expected of the study are added into the informed consent form, and also they are part of the study protocol. So the basic scientist actually analyzes the risk benefit, the research design, the methodology, statistic part, then the review process, SAE, that is CD adverse reactions, and then protocol, any protocol deviation also, then progress and completion report. Now, what about the clinicians? I mentioned, right, trained clinicians, but here we are talking about the clinicians who are part of the ethics board, right? So their role is to look at the intervention, to do the risk benefit analysis, to see the research design is proper, and to check for the methodology. So they are the ones who review the medical care, and also that the facility has all the care, the facility is well equipped to conduct the study, for the conduct of the study. And so management part, compensation, they can look into everything. For the ongoing review of the protocol, the SAE, protocol deviation or violation, progress, completion report. So all these are the roles and responsibilities of the basic scientist plus the clinicians. Now, why do we need to have a legal expert in the ethics committee? Because he's the one who is supposed to review the informed consent document and the translations. He's the one who is supposed to review the MOU, the clinical trial agreement, that is called CTA, the regulatory approvals, then insurance aspects, etc., other site-related approvals, the researchers undertaking, the protocol specific other permissions. For example, if you plan to do a stem cell related study and you need to have a MU with an institute that already has a setup, so you have to take this specific permission, stem cell committee. Again, like the study has to go through the ethics committee. Either you can have an expert in the ethics committee, or you can have a separate stem cell committee for stem cell research. Right, for international collaboration, again, you need some certification and then compliance with the guidelines. So these are all the things that a legal expert is supposed to look into and give his expert opinion. Now, why do we have a social scientist in the board? So the social scientist, he or she looks into the protocol from socio-cultural context, from religious context. I discussed one example, or from a philosophical context, right? And they serve as a patient, participant, societal, or community representative, and bring in ethical and societal concerns, right? Many times, they ask very silly questions. And we clinicians, we feel why they can't understand like the protocol this much also, that this drug is given in this cancer, and sometimes they ask, why is this drug given in only this cancer, and what is the cost, why do you need a new drug, right? But I think all these questions usually are supposed to come from the clinical trial participant, so they are very essential in the group because they give that perspective. Layperson, ethical review of the proposal along with translations, right? Then evaluate the benefit and risk from participants' perspective again. I mentioned about the previous group, the social scientists. Again, layperson also evaluates the benefit and risk from participants' perspective and opine whether the benefits justify the risk. They serve as a patient, participant, community representative and bring in ethical and societal concerns. And they also assess any societal aspect in the trial. I think I could discuss about the 7 people who form the quorum of the ethics committee and about their roles and responsibilities. I think I discussed about the roles and responsibilities of the chairperson, of the layperson, of the basic scientist, of clinician, and then of the theologist, of the legal person. So these people form the quorum of a ethics committee. Now, once you have a meeting, what are the types of decisions by EC? So one is approved, so no worries. Approval can be with or without suggestions. Second decision is revision with minor modifications, and we have to tell what modifications are required. We tell about the modification to the principal investigator, and he in turn goes back to the sponsor, and maybe he comes back with an amended protocol. The other one is revision with major modifications for resubmission. If it is a major modification, then yeah, they need to resubmit the protocol. Only amendment will not help. And the last decision is not approved. Now, if we say that you can't do the study, we need to give valid reasons for why we are rejecting the study. So these are the 4 decisions. One is approved, second is revision with minor modifications, 3 is revision with major modifications, and final number 4 is not approved. So what are the types of review? The other day, one of my colleague from a paraclinical department was asking, so if I want to do study, right, I'm very interested in COVID and I want to just take the data from our MRD, right? So whether I will require the ethics permission, right? So, any retrospective data, if you are using, you can ask for an exempt of ethics review, but you have to notify. What is expedited review? For example, now, see, I am part of a ICMR trial. We are doing this study on prophylaxis in COVID-19. So ICMR in the beginning only, they have asked us, if your ethics committee gives expedited review, then only you can get involved in the study. So based on the priority, the ethics committee can meet and take a call on whether that they can be, without a full board meeting, whether they can give permission for the study. So as I mentioned about the 13 principles of GCP, if you remember, the last principle was on, on the records. So all records must be archived for a period of at least 3 years after the completion or termination of the study. And documents related to regulatory clinical trials must be archived for 5 years or as per regulations. So 3 years, and if the regulation mentions 5 years for the clinical trial, then it should be archived for 5 years. Let me take you through the informed consent form. So it's nothing but fully informing the subject about the study. So fully explain the trial and its procedure, communicate in non-technical language. You can't tell a villager that you have diabetes. You have to say you have increase in sugar in blood. We have to take any language barriers into consideration if we are doing, if a hospital receives Telugu patients, then we have to have the ICF translated in that language. Ensure subjects are well aware of their rights. So what we mean by rights, whether they can, terminate, whether they can leave the study at any point. And then allow enough time for questions. The PI need to allow enough time for questions, ensure subjects are aware of their rights, whether they will be getting any compensation, whether their travel expenses will be reimbursed. So all these should be part of informed consent process. There is something called reconsent. Now, when do we need to take a reconsent? So, in case there is a revision to the protocol, we need to take a reconsent, or in case of safety. Suppose, there was a trial, there was a diabetic drug trial where a lot of patients were having cardiac events. Now, in that case, as EC, we requested the sponsor to have it included in the protocol. So, in that case, you need to initiate a reconsent procedure, because the participants need to be told that, in this study, there are a lot of cardiac related events. Are you still want to be part of the study? Now that, I am talking to all of you, you are working in this pediatric hospital. So there is something called pediatric assent. It's very important. So for children less than 7 years, there is no need to have an assent document. But for children 7 to 12 years, we need to take verbal or oral assent and document it in the presence of parents or legal approved representative, LAR. Right? But for children 12 to 18 years, we need to have written assent. Written assent. It's a part of informed consent, but it is not an informed consent. The parents will sign the informed consent, but the child of 12 to 18 years, he or she has to sign a written assent. Now, in case of pediatrics, many times you need to have waiver of consent from the relevant adult. In that case, you have to have the recording of the consent process. And anyway, nowadays, children, they belong to vulnerable population. So we need to have audio visual consent only. Now, and again, there is another case if the letter will affect the validity of the study. For example, behavioral studies in IV drug abusers in case of children 12 to 18 years. So, it may be required to take a waiver of consent. So now, I think till now I have discussed about the overview of GCP, the evolution of GCP. I discussed about the roles and responsibilities of the ethics committee members, and then about the quorum, and then we discussed about the informed consent process. Now I'll be discussing few case examples. So a dermatologist was part of the team as an advisor for a company that marketed a drug for psoriasis. The product is now in phase 3 trial, and the dermatologist appears for the IEC approval as a principal investigator. Now, what are the challenges for EC? Right? So the dermatologist belongs to the hospital, and he was an advisor for a company that marketed the drug. So what are the challenges for the EC? Whether EC should allow this person to be the principal investigator in this study. So what do you think? I think we can discuss the answers in the question answer session, or maybe, if you want to answer, you can raise your hands.
There's a clear-cut conflict of interest here. The
yes, sir.
Cannot be a person who's already been a part of an advisor.
Yes,
I
sir.
think it's not fair.
It's not fair. Yeah. So as EC, we have to look into these aspects also. Thank you, sir. A phase 3 trial of a new anti-diabetic molecule requires to conduct studies on adolescent school children. The protocol requires a pregnancy test. So what are the challenges for EC, and also elaborate on the consent process? Any volunteer?
This is a sensitive issue because we're talking about
Yes.
adolescent school children and talking about pregnancy test,
Yes.
which has serious implications. So it is not going to be as simple because the
Yes.
parents have to agree as well as the adolescent child. So
Yes.
that is going to be a big issue about the consent process itself.
Yes.
So they need to understand that the pregnancy test is going to be one. Either if they agree, it should be completely confidential.
Yes.
One. Number two, they should agree, and there should not be a violation on the part of either of the
Yes.
investigator. And then they have
Yes.
to agree on the type of anti-diabetic molecule, whatever is being agreed to. So it's a
Yes.
twofold challenge about the pregnancy test
Yes.
and one about the study
Yes.
of the drug.
Yes, sir. So what about the consent process, sir?
Child rights. Child
Yes.
Consent process
rights.
will have to be, as I
So-
told, it will be from both the sides, madam. Both the parents have to give a consent as well
Yes.
as the child. So we
Yes.
cannot go ahead without it because this has got serious implications.
So this requires an assent. Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Yes, sir. Anyone else?
Yeah, in fact, if you see the whole thing from the child rights perspective, also, there should be informed consent. That's what we all believe and what it says.
Yes.
Children should be given information on why they are being subjected to and what kind
Yes.
of test and study it will be done. And
Yes.
probably confidentiality element is also there behind it. That's
Yes.
why information to the parents and to the institution as well as the children, all three come together in this.
Yes. And now, sir, if you think of India as a conservative nation, right? So in terms of pregnancy test, how can the EC ensure that, it protects the child and the family?
Well, this is an
In India,
this is an adolescent age group. So
Yes.
in terms of pregnancy,
Yes.
less than 18 years, is it not going to raise the legal issue?
You forget about 18 years, sir, because adolescents, yeah, that legal issue, yeah, you are right. So legal issues, say 15, 16, 17, yeah, legal issue. So how can we handle this?
adolescent is from the age of 10 plus to
Yes.
18, 19,
Yes.
up to that
Yes.
age. See,
Yes.
in India, up to 18th year, one cannot enter into sexual relationship
Yes.
because the age of consent matters.
Yes.
Second,
Yes.
if any child below 18 is subjected to any kind of sexual relationship, the other person can be prosecuted if
Yes.
the other person is not a child.
Yeah.
So, as you rightly said, India being a conservative society on one part, the other part is there are a lot of legal implications in this
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
study. You cannot
Yes.
ask a child whether he or she is having a sexual relationship.
Yes.
Asking such a question to a
Yes.
child, you need
Yes.
to be very careful, and your questionnaire or your instrument has to be approved by at several levels, several boards.
Yes.
So, asking any question which is not very comfortable for children to answer is a matter of concern.
Yes. So, but most of the global trials, right? They that are towards this age group, right? So they ask for this pregnancy test. So one way, maybe you can have a counselor, right? That takes care of the legal issues. Okay, so from ethics committee point of view, maybe you can suggest to have a counselor during the consent process. Thank you. I move into the next question. So, a multicentric trial on an investigational product as a pharmacogenetics part, the sample will be analyzed at a central location abroad. Now, what are the challenges for this study? So, I'll just give you the cases. Maybe we can discuss during the QA session because it's already 4. The next discussion is on, kinetic study protocol that requires 40 ml of blood from participants to carry out the desired test. An informed consent document is submitted to IEC. What are the challenges in this study? So the previous one was about pharmacogenetic part, and this is about 40 ml of blood. An investigator plans to study the efficacy of normal saline and albumin in dengue hemorrhagic shock in children. I think this study is quite pertinent to your institute because I am told that you do a lot of clinical research, but you have not yet started the trials. So clinical research and especially investigator-initiated studies have the challenges now. Even though you don't need a DCGI approval, but we have so many issues, right, from this insurance, right? If anything goes wrong in the study, who provides the insurance, right? And then if you have to give any compensation, right, to the participants, so who provides the money? If you have to take care of the transport of the participants, who provides the money, right? And how do you get the funding from? So without proper funding, it is very difficult for an investigator to initiate a study. So this is one such study. The investigator plans to study the efficacy of normal saline and albumin in dengue hemorrhagic shock in children. He provides evidence of the use of albumin in the above condition. So from clinical practice point of view, maybe you all, sometimes try different things, but if you want to publish this, again, there is another issue here. If you publish this and if that publication is used by the pharmaceutical firm to market or develop their product, then again, you will be in trouble. So the recent guideline says investigator can initiate a study, but at the same time, he has to take an undertaking from the firm that the firm cannot use this data for the development or marketing of the drug. A study is designed to assess the adherence of rural patients to inhalation technique of metered-dose inhalers. The steps are explained with pictorial representation and ICF is furnished in English. What are the challenges? It's in rural population, you have the photo explaining the study, but ICF is furnished in English. During continuous review process, a trial product is found to cause serious event that required hospitalization in 1% of the participants globally. What are the challenges for the IEC? I think I already discussed. You may need to amend the protocol and to amend the ICF, stating that 1% of the participants had cardiac related events. An ongoing trial reports 3 protocol deviations in a month. Is there anything the EC needs to address? 3 protocol deviations. So with this, I finish my presentation. I think I'll hand over it to Dr. Anuradha. I'll be available. If you have any questions, maybe you can write in the chat box, or after the session, we'll have a QA session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ananya. Your presentation was clear, crisp, and I think conveyed everything that we wanted to convey. I really love
Thank
the
you,
talk.
sir.
Thank you very much. Any
Thank
questions
you.
from any of the? I'm particularly looking for the first-time EC members. If there's anybody any questions, suggestions, please ask. I think you made it so clear that they don't have any questions. So
if there are any questions, sir, maybe we can take it together, myself and Anuradha after that. Yes, sir. So I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Yeah. So welcome, Dr. Anuradha. Just Dr. Vinay is so happy to see you as a teacher. He's just next to me. Okay, so good.
Yes, sir.
Looking forward to your talks, madam. Please take over.
Sure, sir. Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am. We can see, ma'am.
Welcome.
Thank you, Vasudha, sir. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think Ananya took through in a nice way from the history and ensuring that what is the importance of the GCP and the roles and responsibilities of the EC members. And she has made my job very easy because like she has already stressed so many important components which I need to stress now. Now moving on to the first topic of mine, that is roles and responsibilities of stakeholders. I'll be just briefing out why it is important, the roles and responsibilities of stakeholders, and who are the stakeholders, what are the roles, and what are the things which required to fulfill those responsibilities. Why is this important? In 2016, ICH for pharmaceutical. I think I request participants to mute. Thank you. In 2016, ICH for pharmaceuticals for human use released E6, that is R2, that is in the year 2016. There is the latest version 5, which comprises of various new standards, which introduce 26 new standards, which mainly clearly suggest like what are the responsibilities, and it gave a more overview about the clarifications of the responsibilities of investigators and sponsors with regards to the data management outcomes. It also stressed like about the design to increase adoption of quality by design and results-based management principles and methodologies in clinical development. It also defines scope of clinical trial oversight and responsibilities of all the stakeholders. And it focuses on the quality design of the clinical trials, ensuring that appropriate tools and methods should be used to collect the appropriate information during the clinical studies or the trials, and to identify the risk and triggers ahead of the implementation of these. Who are the stakeholders for conducting the clinical trial? Mainly the stakeholders include sponsorer, CROs, regulators, SMOs or ARO. SMOs is Site Managing Office, ARO is Academic Research Organization, institution, and the staff members, which include the investigators, CRCs, and nurses. Of course, the subjects who are the participant and the volunteers in case of phase 1 trial. First, coming to the first and foremost important stakeholder, that is the regulators. Regulators, it includes regulatory agencies and the local body, that is the ethics committee. Who are these regulatory bodies? They include CDSCO. Important ones for the clinical trial is CDSCO. CDSCO is Central Drugs Standard Control Organization. And in case of any genetic studies, like another body came into role, that is Review Committee for Genetic Manipulation. And if it is academic studies, okay, which does not involve any pharmaceutical industry, or it is an investigator initiated studies, then ICMR will play a role. That is, which comes under Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. If there is association with the other aspects, then the other bodies like Genetic Engineering, Central Bureau of Narcotics, and Directorate General of Foreign Trade, all this come into effect, like if the study involves a multicentric and various other multifacets. What are the regulatory roles and responsibilities? These regulators mainly implement the regulations, guidelines, and system and procedures in order to protect the clinical trial subjects. And they also should ensure the scientific research has a benefit, and it should always have a benefit versus the risk, and consistency to be maintained in assessing the assessment of clinical trials across the country or across the globe. Process and review clinical trial applications as per the regulations, and provide opportunities for the dialogue with all the stakeholders in case of any amendments is required. And what are the guidelines which we need to follow it at present? Okay, it's initially we used to follow the Schedule Y and the Drugs and Cosmetic Act and Rules 1945. Now it has been amended, and it is called as New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules 2019. Meaning we have to abide by these guidelines. And apart from this, we also should follow Indian GCP guidelines 2012 and ethical guidelines of biomedical research on human subjects 2017 is essential for the academic research. For the academic research, we should follow these ethical guidelines of biomedical research on human subjects, whereas for the clinical trials, the above two guidelines are essential. And all the trials, whether it can be clinical trials or clinical research, like the other or as the academic studies, should be registered under CTRI. What is a CTRI? That is Clinical Trial Registry of India, which actually set up by the ICMR, National Institute of Medical Science. Like here, like online registration is done, and all the studies should be registered under CTRI before enrolling the first subject after obtaining the clearance from the ethics committee. And the registration of the clinical trials and the academic studies is mandatory since 15 June 2019, and it is free of cost. No charges applied for the registration. And importance is to make all the studies transparent and publicly available. And from April 1st, 2018, CTRI has stopped registering clinical trials retrospectively. What earlier they used to do is after conducting the trials, they used to register retrospectively. That has been stopped by the CTRI, and now only the prospectively they are going to register it. That is before start of the trials or the clinical research. And it is recommended for even for the non-interventional observation studies and academic trials also. Not only for the clinical trials, the registry is required. The registration is mandatory even for the non-interventional, observational, and the academic trials. And as you all are aware, why IRB is started, you can see in this picture. For example, if there is any intervention of the trials is done for the participant either by the sponsor or by the investigator, only of the consequences happens, they cannot say whether it's right or wrong. So now the IRB play a much role in order to protect the rights of the participants and also to in order to look for the benefits over versus the risk. What are the roles and responsibilities of EC? I think Dr. Ananya mentioned clearly. I think I'll skip this. And now EC is one of the stakeholders along with the regulatory bodies. Now another stakeholder is the sponsor. Sponsor can be an individual, it can be a company, institution, or organization which takes responsibility for the initiation of the study, management of the study, and of course the financial financing the clinical trial or the clinical research. In case of the clinical trials, most of the times the sponsor is a pharmaceutical company, whereas in the academic studies, most of the time it can be some national bodies like ICMR, RDBT, or DST will fund it. What are the roles and responsibilities of the sponsors? Okay, the sponsors mainly helps in following the regulatory ethics and also responsible for the submission of these protocols and training of all the related study personnel and the participants and the vendors. And they should ensure the quality management and monitoring systems. They should always choose the right person for the right studies, the right trial. This appropriately qualified person should be chosen by the sponsors, and they should select the reliable vendors, that is mainly the CROs or the CRCs, and they should ensure the protocol compliance during the course of the study. And when appropriate monitoring and audit is required in case of any safety issues, if in the case of development of any SAEs or the AEs, then the compensation should be given by the sponsors. Next comes the CROs. The CRS is contract research organization. They play a middleman role between the sponsor and the institution. What are the roles and responsibilities of the CROs? They implement systems and procedures for the conduct of clinical trials and assessment of safety. They do conduct clinical trials mainly based on the regulations and guidelines. They are abide by the contract signed with the sponsors, and they are going to implement this in the institution. They maintain the accurate records. They escalate the concerns to the sponsor whenever they come across in the study site. They are the mean line of contact between the sponsor and the study site. They perform variety of operations and the monitoring activities, that is periodically, and whatever the monitoring activities happens, and those things should be communicated even to the ethics committee. And the CROs are the ones who are mainly responsible for the accountability of the IP. IP is investigational product, and in case of any defect, the return of the IP or the destruction of the IP, that's the main role is played by the CROs. And next stakeholder is the principal investigator, without whom the study is impossible. And he is the main person who is required for the conduct of the clinical trial. He's a person who's responsible for the conduct of the trial at the trial site. If the trial is conducted by a team of individuals, many times I know one person cannot handle the study. They have a group of people who can conduct the study. In that case, the primary person who is responsible for the trial or the study, he is called as a principal investigator. The other members is called as a co-investigators. And I know since many of the medical professionals have their multiple responsibilities, and it is very difficult to cater to all the needs which has been mentioned by the clinical trials. So they have an assistant. I'll come to that later on next. What are the roles and responsibilities of the PA? And the PA should be qualified as per the Indian GCP. He should be qualified as a specialized person as per the MCI, and he should have an adequate sources at his site. with respect to the subject recruitment, adequate number of qualified staff or facilities who can take care of it, and the adequate time for the conduct of the trial. If he's a too busy person, if he's not able to give enough time for the study, he should not take up any clinical trials or clinical research, because he has to give enough time for the process of the conduct of the study. For example, if he does not get an adequate number of the particular subject, then also like recruitment will not happen, so we cannot conduct the study. So we should ensure that adequate source or subject can be recruited at the study site, and we should follow the protocol, and he is the person who is responsible for the compliance of the protocol and accountability of the IP apart from the CRO. And he's the one who has to take the informed consent by explaining everything to the participant, and he's the one who has to be concerned about the reporting with respect to the accuracy, completeness, legibility, and timelines with respect to the process of the clinical trial. And periodic progress reports should be prepared by the PI, and he has to communicate these periodic reports to the ethics committee. Like in our institution, once in every 6 months, they have to send the progress report to the EC, and based on the progress report, we will allow them to continue the study, or in case if there is any fallacies, like if there is any loopholes or limitations in the study, we'll stop the study. And of course, like he's the one who has to report the safety reports to the sponsors as well as to the ethics committee. As I told you, like since many of us will have multiple responsibilities, it is very difficult to coordinate and difficult to spend enough time for the clinical research. So we'll be having one more assistant to us who can coordinate the clinical research. But the ultimate responsibility lies with the PI. We should keep it in mind, like PI is the one who should be responsible for everything. Only thing is coordinator can assist the PI. He or she will play a vital role to the conduct of the study, and this person is the one who manages day-to-day activities in the compliance with the protocol, regulations, and delegated duties as per the guidelines or as per the protocol as suggested by the PI. But this person is not held responsible for anything which happens during the course of the trial. It is a PI who is responsible for everything. Only thing is this coordinator can just assist in for the smooth functioning of the clinical trials at the site. Next comes the institution. Okay, so far what are the stakeholders? I said they are request. Of course, institution is the one which is going to provide the space and all other infrastructure to us. They also play in equal responsibilities and roles in the conduct of a clinical study. For the conduct of clinical trial, as per the GCP and regulations, the institution permission is essential to ensure adequate resourcing and training of the study staff. As you know, like whoever be the PI or the investigator, co-investigator, and even the coordinator should be aware of the GCP guidelines. They all should be trained in GCP. Unless until they are trained in GCP, they will not be made PI. They cannot be a part of the study. And the institution can have a responsibility of oversighting the subjects, support, guides, medical care in case if there is any issues which come across in the study site. Okay, those patients or the study members or the coordinators can take up the issues to the management of the institutions, and they have the right to overlook all these activities. And institution, of course, should support the IEC. As you know, like IEC, that is Institution Ethics Committee, functioning like a neutral body in the institution. They cannot favor other studies. They cannot work for the management, actually. But institution should support the IEC for its function, for the fair functioning of the IEC. But IEC cannot always favor the institution, but they should take a decision independently without favoring the institution, mainly to take care of all the guidelines as per the ICA GCP. And they should support the IEC councils as well as the auditors whenever the periodic monitoring is required. Infrastructure support to conduct the clinical trials, of course, in order to maintain the quality of all the bodies, whether it can be a site or it can be a ethics committee, accreditation to national bodies is very essential. Nowadays, even you are aware that ethics committee is also accredited by the NABH, especially to maintain the proper functioning of the bodies. And of course, without the subjects or the participants, it's incomplete. He plays a major stakeholder. And what is the importance of these subjects or the participants? Here, he or she should read the informed consent thoroughly before getting participated in the trials. He should understand the reason for the participation. We cannot lure anybody to enroll into the study. And he has all the rights to ask any number of questions before getting into the study or before accepting the trials. They should follow certain instructions related to the drug dosing and the tests and procedures, visit compliance, report any untoward incidents immediately to the study staff, and also the grievances. If they have any grievances, they should immediately bring it to the notice of the ethics committee. That is the reason, like in all the informed consent, we have one column, like in case of any grievances, they can contact the ethics committee members. Usually the chairperson or the member secretary phone number should be displayed in the informed consent, because in during any course of the trials, if they come across any issues, they can have all the rights to communicate to the EC for, about the studies. So the links are the guidelines, okay, which is required now to understand the roles and responsibilities. To summarize, regulator is a legal authority and hence has responsibility and accountability. And who are the stakeholders? That is sponsor, IEC, CROs, SMOs, that is site managing organization, CROs, contract research organization, institutions, prime PIs, and other COIs, staff, and have legal responsibilities and accountabilities. Subjects do not forfeit rights by signing the informed consent. They are responsible and accountable too. Just by signing, they cannot say, like, I didn't understand that. It is a responsibility of the investigator team or the study team to ensure that they understood the consent properly. And once the consent is signed, it is their responsibility as well. Hope you understand the roles and stakeholders. If there is any queries, I would like to take it. I have one more topic to discuss. Any queries from anyone?
Thank you, madam. It was quite
Hello.
clear.
Hello? Yeah, yes, sir. Any queries from anyone? If there is no queries, shall we take up the questions later on? I'll go with the next presentation, sir. Shall I?
Prahlad sir, you have some doubts, sir?
Any doubt?
Yeah, doctor, I just had one question. How
Yeah,
do
please.
how do you deal with volunteers who choose to drop off at a crucial part of the trial?
Crucial part means?
When you've come up to a certain point in your trials and they for no evident reason choose to drop off.
Correct.
So how do you deal with them?
See, it is always voluntary, as you mentioned. We cannot force anybody to continue with the trial in any point of the time. Only thing
Okay,
is, you can just, because always we should ensure that what is the reason for withdrawal of the study. Okay.
Okay.
For only thing, we should always write a reason for the reason, like why they're stepping out of the trial. But we cannot force anybody or lure anybody to continue with it at any point of the study. Okay, in case, okay, it's very because as we already know, like it's always a voluntary informed consent.
Yeah, but isn't it also
That is the reason. That is the reason I told you in the beginning of the study itself. It is always, you should always build a confidence and rapport between the patient and the investigator and the patient. See, once you build a rapport, like as we know in the clinical practice also, once you build a rapport, they do stay with us.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that rapport we should build it. Okay, not by forcing anybody or something. Like it depends upon like how we conduct the study. If we are making comfortable and if they're answering all the queries and if they're happy with our services, of course they will continue.
Okay. Okay.
Hope I understood your issues.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, doctor.
Thank you. Any questions from anyone? Shall I go ahead with the next presentation, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, you can ask the question, sir.
One thing is, ma'am said, Dr. Anuradha madam is crystal clear. Only thing is, the principal investigator is said.
Yeah.
Majority of the time, our postgraduate will start the research, clinical research, is it not? And we'll be giving the approval.
Postgraduates cannot be a PI for the clinical trials. For the clinical trials, as per the MCA, should be a specialist.
Okay.
Okay, and whatever postgraduates will do, sir, they're for the academic research, for the thesis or for their academic research. For that, they can be the PA and we can be as a guide, as a COI. And because it is not funded, it is not, we are not doing anything as a new drug or new intervention, and we are not favoring anything for the manufacturers or the pharma industry. Whatever we do is an investigation initiated based on the some new ideas what we get without any vested interest in the manufacturers or in the marketing.
Right, madam. So in that case, the guide should have undergone GCP and need not the postgraduates, no?
For the academic studies, need not be trained by the GCP. Academic studies. It is for the clinical trials, of course, yes, sir.
Okay, okay. Oh, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. We'll take, we'll go ahead.
Ma'am, meeting, excuse me, meeting will be ending in 2 minutes. So we'll log out and we'll re-log in.
Yeah, that is better. I'll continue next. Okay, we'll log out.
Yes,
Okay,
we'll end the meeting and we'll re-log in.
okay, sure. Terminologies. What is AE and ADR? AE is an injury results during the use of a drug, but causal association is not yet established. Means, for example, if the person is a part of the clinical trial or clinical trials who is having a new drug, okay, but he'll meet with an accident, but the accident is not due to the drug, but it's an injury has caused during the course of the trial. Okay, when he is a participant in the trial, the injury has happened, but that causal association is not established because the accident is not due to the road traffic accident is not due to the drug per se. It is because something else. Okay, this is known as adverse event. Okay, and what is ADR? If there is any unwanted and noxious effect of a drug when used in recommended doses in an adverse drug reaction during the course of the trial, if the person has any issues with respect to the drug or with respect to any of the instrument or the device, and we can establish the temporal relationship between the event and the investigational product, then you can say it's an adverse drug reactions. Okay, here there should be a causal association between the drug and the event. That is known as ADR, that is adverse drug reactions. If there is no causal relation, it is called as adverse event. See, anything which happens during the course of the trial or the research, that can be AE or the adverse event, has to be reported to the ethics committee by the primary investigator. And what is serious adverse event? An AE or ADR that is associated with death in case if the death happens or in case if the inpatient is hospitalized or if it is leading to prolongation of hospitalization, persistent or significant disability or incapacity, or if there is a congenital anomaly. If a woman is a participant and she became pregnant and over the period, like after a few years, like whatever the child she has given birth to has an congenital anomaly. Okay, so that also can be considered a serious adverse event, or is otherwise life-threatening, is termed as an ACE. If the following criteria is fulfilled, like death,